Welcome back to Hardware Asylum. While we wait for some parts to show up for the scam case build and refurbish, I'm going to start a new project. I'm going to call this one Classic. This is a mini tower in the old AT form factor. I believe this machine has a 386 in it. I got it off of eBay, and as you can see, the bezel is severely yellowed. The chassis is kind of dark, and we have a mismatched 3.5-inch floppy drive there. I did fire this machine up though, and it works. So we're going to go and try to clean it up and maybe do a few upgrades. So I've been in this case before. We did an image of the hard drive, so we have the data backed up. I was able to check out what's inside, and we do have just some classic 386 vintage PC damage to deal with, a leaky battery for instance. There are a few components that are missing. But that is really what you would expect from an old vintage retro machine like this. So let's go ahead and open it up and see what's inside. I'm calling this build Classic, not because it is a classic case. I mean, yes, it is a bit of a retro machine, but it has a classic design. And by that, I'm talking about the bezel design. This is really what I would call the premier bezel design of the mid to late 90s. And you find these types of cases just about anywhere. I have basically 3 copies of this particular bezel. Unfortunately, this came off the scam case. We have a couple of broken pieces that are really preventing it from being reinstalled. But I did do a nice retro bright on it. It has a nice white color again. It was slightly yellowed, but not as bad as this particular chassis. The bezel design is different. It's not a design that I'm familiar with, but it seems to be fairly common in the retro circles. The major differences here are we have the vent which goes vertical on the super classic design, but then we have horizontal stripes here and a convenient keyboard plug at the bottom of the bezel. It still does have the awesome rocker switch. We have 2 external 5.25-inch drive bays, 2 external 3.5-inch drive bays, and also 2 internal 3.5-inch drive bays for hard drives and whatnot. As with most retro machines of this era, we have a turbo switch, we have a reset switch, and the classic key lock. Unlike some of the other cases I have, we're also missing the case badge, so we'll have to resolve that as we are building this machine back up. With these old retro machines, you do have to exercise a little bit of care. Threads can strip out in the metal because of the screw coming in and out a lot. The ABS plastic on the front bezel can become dry and brittle. And the bezel can become cracked from users removing the cover incorrectly. You always want to pull the cover back and then lift it straight up. One part of these old computers that people often forget is that the feet are often made of rubber or plastic, and as you can tell, this particular case slid around a lot in its life. And I'm actually very surprised that this is really the only superficial damage on the chassis. Normally the bezel goes, and this one is in really good shape. Inside, we do have 2 3.5-inch hard drives. We have a full complement of 30-pin SIMM memory. There is an external battery pack with 4 AA batteries that is empty. We have our I/O adapter. We also have a video card, and that looks like it. I believe in this empty slot was likely the expansion off the I/O, and down here might have been a modem. The motherboard itself has an expansion socket for a 486 style processor. On board, we have the AMD 40 megahertz. And it doesn't appear that we have a socket for a math coprocessor, but once we get the motherboard out, we can take a closer look. To get started, we're going to go ahead and strip down this case completely. We will be removing all of the internal components, taking the front bezel off, doing a retro bright. We'll be cleaning up the outer shell. And we do have a bit of discoloration inside the chassis, so we're going to scrub that and basically get this looking as new as possible before we go and reassemble everything. 5 1/4 have an edge connector, which looks like this on the ribbon. This is a new 5 1/4 for me. I've never seen this particular design. According to the sticker on the back, it's a Matsushita. It appears to have a motor-driven flywheel. Has a locking eject and a screw-style servo for the head. So this mimics a lot of the current 3.5-inch drive designs. This 3.5-inch drive is very dirty. You can tell it's been in there for a really long time. Senko brand. Very compact. It has a cover on the back and very dark front bezel. I've taken these hard drives out before. There was only screws on this side. Got a Seagate drive. Here we have another Seagate drive. This is one that I posted on social media as one of the most ornate IDE drives I have ever seen. As you can see here, the corners are rubber mounted. We have a rail that's actually attached. The front cover is not square like on the newer ones. It follows the contour of the drive. It makes it look much like a miniaturized MFM drive, like the Microscience ones that I had posted earlier on the channel. This is a Seagate Technologies ST3243A. The next thing I like to remove is the expansion cards. And as mentioned, there was only 2 of them that are still in the machine, so we'll go ahead and remove the I/O adapter first. This is a standard WinBond controller. Single IDE supporting 2 drives. Single floppy supporting 2 drives, serial, parallel, game port. Oh, that was really stuck in there. Video card is a standard Trident POS. The next item to remove is the motherboard. We do that from the back side of the chassis. Oh, no we don't. Typically with the MiniTower chassis and the 8-8 form factor, the motherboard tray has a couple of screws in the corner that allow you to remove the tray completely. And what that means for us is that we'll have to remove it from the top. These motherboards are normally held in place with a combination of plastic or nylon standoffs and screws similar to modern ATX motherboards. This particular board had a screw right here that has since fallen out or corroded out or was never installed. So this motherboard just needs to be slid down and it should come right out. There we have the motherboard. It didn't slide out as easy as I'd liked, so I ended up having to cut the nylon standoffs. And part of that was because you couldn't get the motherboard to slide down enough because of the bottom of the chassis. We'll just have to get some replacements if we decide to reinstall this motherboard. Unlike the bezels on a modern chassis, these old AT style cases were held in place with screws. Before I wrap up this video, I want to do a quick compare and contrast between 2 similar but very different MiniTower chassis. On this side, we have a case a lot like the one I built my very first computer in. It was a MiniTower, and I remembered that when I put it together, you could remove some screws on the back, flip out the motherboard tray, and that's how you installed most of the components. Both cases have two external 5 1/4s, two external 3 1/2s, and two internal 3 1/2s. When you get into the mid tower, you basically add one more bay for an external 5 1/4. And when you get into the full tower, sometimes it added an extra 3 external 5 1/4s, plus a couple more internal 3 1/2s. The AT form factor had a total of 8 expansion slots and a single port in the back for the keyboard DIN, along with a few stamps for your serial, parallel, and game port so that you could mount them directly to the chassis and open up another one of these expansion slots. I had trouble getting the motherboard out, and it was because I was expecting the motherboard tray to move away. It would be very similar to this case, but instead this one was riveted directly to the chassis and makes it very strong. Now what I didn't realize, but noticed and didn't really pay too much attention to, was on the bottom of this case we have a seam right here. And lo and behold, there's a screw down here in the corner and another one down in this corner. This panel is removed, and that is how you get the motherboard in and out. As I mentioned before, the classic case build will be an ongoing project. Next up, we're going to be refurbishing the motherboard. We'll do a bit of retro bright on the front bezel, clean up the chassis, and put this system back together. Thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and I'll catch you in the next one.